You are now locked in to Take a Knee Sports Podcast.
Imagine Saturday mornings at the barbershop. The conversations that are had probably would leave memories in your head for the rest of your life. Here on Take a Knee Sports Podcast, I have a candid, open, barbershop style discussion. Just, discussing current and past events in the sports world, football, boxing, and basketball, sports that I love. Mostly facts. Some facts, I would say, a lot of opinion, but always keeping it real. On this week's episode of Take a Knee Sports Podcast, I'll recap the 2024 NBA Allstar Weekend. I'll also talk about Tszyu and the Thurman fight that's coming up. That's a big one. And last but not least, I'll also recap the 2023-2024 season for my favorite team, the LA Rams. Yes, sir. We're back. Yeah. It feels good. You feel me? I'm back on the mic. I can't believe it. It's been a while. Yeah. Bring that music down. You know what I'm saying? It's been a while. I've been going since 2020. I can't believe it. But it's cool, though. We're back for season 2 of Take a Knee Sports Podcast. I'm your boy, Phil. And we're here, baby. You know what I'm saying? So we just going to jump into it. You feel me? All-Star Weekend NBA just passed this past weekend. A lot of things to talk about, for sure. Number one, it started on Friday. They had the Celebrity All-Star Game, which was actually very entertaining. It was a bunch of celebrities that can actually ball, like C.J. Stroud can ball, Micah Parsons can ball, and then you had your celebrities out there that I'm like, what are you doing on the court? And Jennifer Hudson was one of those people. I'm just like, Jennifer Hudson, basketball don't really make sense to me. But hey, it's a Celebrity All-Star Game, so I guess to each your own, you feel me? But it was a very entertaining game. They had the LED light court. I think that was a really cool concept that they came up with, especially being the fact that one, they had a He's on Fire competition. So what happened was during one of the breaks, I believe between the second and third quarter, maybe after halftime, they had a competition to where they sent 3 players out, and those 3 players shot from different spots on the floor, and whoever made the most baskets got put on fire. So once they got put on fire, which actually team Stephen A. Smith, his team actually won that particular challenge, for the next quarter, all the points that those 3 people scored were double the points. So they already have the Ruffles 4-point line. So if anybody had to hit a 4-point shot at that time, it actually would have been worth 8 points, which is crazy. And then another cool thing that they had with the same LED court is during the fourth quarter, they adjusted the 3-point line. They would move it back and forth, which I thought was pretty cool as well. And it still was worth the same amount of points, man. So shouts out to Ruffles for sponsoring the LED court as well as being a huge sponsor with the NBA. I thought that was really cool, and I think it's something that they can continue to work on and bring more viewership to the All-Star Weekend. Because from what it seems like, All-Star viewership was up actually 54%. So for me, I felt just like what the percentage states. I was like, hey, it's finally getting back to where the All-Star Game is actually entertaining, right? So they have very entertaining celebrity game, and that led right into the HBCU Classic, which I felt like was a pretty entertaining game as well, right? So you have 2 black schools going at it, showcasing their skills, and also highlighting HBCUs during Black History Month, right? It's already one of the shortest months in the year, but like I said, it highlights those HBCUs that probably wouldn't get that TV time on a normal basis. So I thought that was pretty good for the NBA to do. And I feel like if they continue to do that, it's just going to continue to shine light. Just like when Deion Sanders last year went to Jackson State, and the media attention that was garnered by Jackson State is just outrageous. Even though he went to Colorado, Jackson State now has a platform to where anybody in that SWAC conference is elevated for sure. And then moving on from there, they had the Kia Skills Challenge, right? So they had 3 different teams. They had the Team Pacers, who ended up winning it. They had the Team Top Pick, which had Blanchero from Orlando. They had Anthony Edwards. I really like that guy for sure. And they had Wembanyama from the Spurs, the rookie guy, 7 feet tall, shoot, dribble. He can do it all for sure. And they also had Team All-Star, right? They had Scotty Burns, they had Tyrese Maxey, and Trae Young from Atlanta. Team Pacers end up winning the challenge, and during this challenge, what they do is go through different obstacle courses, passing the ball, shooting the ball, and they challenge each other the length of the court within a certain time period. And of course, those that complete those tasks within that certain time period normally wins. And in this case, the Team Pacers came out on top. I thought that was pretty cool. I'm not really a big fan of watching the challenges because it's kind of boring a little bit. But it's also exciting for the fans to see some of your biggest names and some of your upcoming names that you'll probably see in the Rising Star game, which a lot of those guys did play in that Rising Star game, including Anthony Edwards and Wembanyama. I think that the highlight of the early weekend before the All-Star game was definitely Celebrity All-Star game, as I was talking about before. Your boy Micah Parsons won the MVP. And he won the MVP because he was out there kind of showing out. He was dropping buckets. I felt like he really came to play, and I didn't realize that he could actually play basketball like that. So it was very interesting to see. I think he caught a couple of bodies too when I think he dunked a couple of times. And also they gave my boy Puka Nacua, they gave him the top 10 chain because he caught a body and dunked on a fast break. And I'm like, okay, Puka Nacua, you can also play a little ball, you feel me? CJ Stroud was also a big surprise with me as well. Now, I had heard through the grapevine that in high school he was actually a basketball player as well. And from what he said, I think he was on, what podcast was that I was listening to? I believe it might have been the Gilbert Arenas podcast on YouTube. He talked about how he was averaging 30 in high school. And I'm like, CJ, really? You was averaging 30 points. But hey, you know, he might have been, because from what I seen, he can put in a little bit of work there. You know what I mean? Like, he's not only a great football player, but he's also a really good basketball player as well. So that was a big surprise to me. And I feel like he might have a chance he could have possibly played in the G League. You know what I mean? Maybe not the NBA, but maybe the G League, you know? Also, another surprise for me was, I believe he's a YouTuber, Tristan Jazz. The boy can ball a little bit. You know what I mean? He got a nice little J. And him and CJ Stroud probably kept the team in the game. Stephen A. Smith, it probably would have got out a little bit out of hand if it weren't for those two. So shouts out to CJ Stroud, shouts out to Tristan Jazz, also shouts out to Micah Parsons and Puka Nacua, my boy. It was a really good game. It was pretty entertaining. And like I said, with the different challenges and the LED court and things of that sort, I thought that they did a really good job with that. So moving on through the weekend, of course, you also had the 3-point contest, which it seems like it was Dame time weekend, basically. So my boy Damian Lillard, he showed up for sure. And I feel like he's starting to make his presence felt in the Eastern Conference, coming from the Western Conference, you know, playing with the Portland Trailblazers for all those years. I think that he's starting to show people that he is as good as advertised, for sure. I think that when he was in Portland, it's not that big of a market, and people don't really get to see you that much. If you do watch him, it's going to be late night, and a lot of people on the East Coast were definitely not staying up. I know I wasn't staying up to watch the Portland Trailblazers play nobody, for sure. I barely want to stay up to watch the Golden State Warriors play. So yeah, Damian Lillard, it's your time, my boy. He ended up winning the 3-point contest, and that was just the beginning of his weekend, and we'll get back to that, right? So also they had the slam dunk contest, which this is probably one of the best slam dunk contests that I've seen in a long time, man. I think that Reggie Miller said it best during the weekend. He said, I think we need to start bringing actual all-stars back into the slam dunk contest. And Jaylen Brown agreed, because Jaylen Brown was saying that all weekend. He's like, I'm going to be the one who starts bringing all-stars back into the slam dunk contest. And I think it's smart, because especially if you want to continue to get the viewership up and you want it to be entertaining and people to actually be fully involved in the contest, you definitely want to start bringing some names that people know about. Like Mac McClung, even though he's a great dunker and he ended up, retaining his title and winning it back-to-back, being one of the first to do it in a long time, I think that if there were bigger names in the contest, it definitely would have been a lot more exciting. I feel like Jaylen Brown, he made it to the finals, but I don't think he should have necessarily made it to the finals per se. I think it was a little more name-based that he made it to the finals. Some of his dunks were a little more basic, but he did throw it down. Don't get me wrong, but I just felt like creativity, he tried to give a little creativity. Like he tried to do the D Brown dunk, ended up not actually even covering his eyes during that dunk until he actually got on the ground, which is not the D Brown dunk. Like D Brown actually covered his eyes and dunked the ball. Just the thought of him, thinking about taking it back a little bit and trying to emulate some of those guys who were grand champions back in the day, I think that was really cool of him for sure. And I think once all these other All-Stars begin to catch on and they start to jump into these dunk contests, I think it might get a little spicy out there for sure. Because I think it's a lot of guys in the league that could definitely put on a really good show when it comes to the dunk contest. I think, say for instance, like Anthony Edwards. Like Anthony Edwards got some bunnies, my boy. Like he can really jump out the window. And I think that if he was able to throw a little creativity in there and jump into this contest, he can make it very interesting. Like him against Mac McClung, I thought would have been a very interesting watch. I think also that somebody like, let me think, who else would be out there? Even Obi Toppin coming back and jumping into it, I think that too would have been interesting. Like his brother actually participated this year, Jacob Toppin, and I thought that Jacob did a pretty good job. I felt like he was a little bit nervous because of the fact that it was his first dunk contest and he's just coming out of college, And like I'm a Miami Heat fan, so Jaime Jaquez, he represented for the Miami Heat in the dunk contest. I felt like he did pretty decent. Like I thought that, he brought a little bit of creativity. He jumped over a couple of heads and showed that he has some leaping ability. And I didn't even realize that. Like I watched a couple games and I seen him ball out a little bit, but this was the first time I actually was able to see his athleticism, and I understand now. I see why the Miami Heat drafted him. I think that he's a really good stretch forward that can not only get to the basket and get above the rim, but also can shoot from the outside as well. But I think that to bring that thrill back to the dunk contest, I want to see somebody like Jimmy Butler. Like Jimmy Butler has bunnies too. You feel me? Like I think that if somebody like him were to be in the dunk contest, or who else is out there? Just name any other All-Star, honestly, that has a little bit of jumping ability. I feel like it would have been really, really cool to see that. And I'm a little upset about it, but at the same time, it still gave me some type of thrill to be able to see the dunk contest and see that they're trying to improve it, right? And it was one of the first times that a dunk contest champion repeated in a very long time. So just to see that, I thought that was pretty cool. And maybe, we never know, seeing Jaylen Brown in the dunk contest, maybe some of these All-Stars will be like, hey, maybe I can try it out, I'm not sure if it's because of injuries that they're not trying to take that chance and enter some of these contests because they figure they may get hurt or something like that. But hey, you never know. I guess we'll see in the near future, hopefully. And moving right on into the finale of the weekend, which was the actual NBA All-Star game. I thought it was a pretty entertaining game. They went back to the old East versus West. A few years prior to this year, they had been, selecting teams. So whoever the team captains may have been in most, I think the previous couple years has been LeBron and whomever. I think it was also Team Giannis last year as well. They have been able to select whomever they wanted, whether that be from the East Coast or the West Coast. So this year, to get back to that traditional East Coast versus West Coast conference situation, I thought that was a pretty cool thing to do. And it may be telling as to who will be in the NBA Finals and who might win this thing, man. I think with the East pulling it out, it showed that, hey, man, the East, we got some players over here. You feel me? Like, it's a couple of teams. Of course, you got the Nuggets coming out of the West. You also have the Minnesota Timberwolves, who are very much surprising a lot of people. You have some young teams like the Sacramento Kings. You have the Lakers, of course. You have Golden State, who's trying to pull up the rear and work their way back up the scale to get back into that playoff contention. I think they're probably in ninth place right now, so they have a little bit of work to do after the All-Star break. But the East, the Bucks with Damian Lillard, that just might be the winning ticket right there, my friend. He might actually potentially get himself a ring by the way he was playing in this All-Star game. Thus the reason why he was named the MVP of the All-Star game. Now, there were other people balling out as well, especially Big Cat, Karl Anthony Towns. Your boy dropped a 50 burger. He dropped a 50 piece, which shows his range. Like, not only was he getting buckets from the inside, but he also was shooting from the outside as well. And I think the reason why he didn't probably get the MVP is because Damian Lillard outshined him just a little bit. Even though he didn't get 50 points, I think Damian Lillard had a little over 40, and he was shooting from half court, like multiple times, shooting regular, not like you trying to force a shot up and hope that you make it. No, my man was pulling up from half, like right inside the line on the logo, shooting threes, raining them down as if he was shooting from the regular 3-point line. Like, I'm like, Damon, I knew you was good, my boy, but shooting from half court like it's a regular jump shot is crazy. That's fucking crazy. I'm sorry. Like, that's crazy, bro. Just pull up just like it's a regular shot from the top. That's how he's pulling up on people, man. I'm like, yo, get this. Yo, somebody come get this, man. You feel me? Like, Damian Lillard is really starting to show, like I said earlier, that he's really starting to show, man, listen, it's Dame time, my boy. Yeah, I've been hiding in Portland, but I'm about to show y'all boys what it's really like to be on that Dame time, you feel me? And like I said, if he continues to play like this and they stay healthy, man, even though I'm a Miami Heat fan and I pull for my Miami Heat at all times, I secretly am like, I want to see him get a ring, you feel me? So if that can work out and they get to the playoffs and they're able to sustain, because once you get to the playoffs, it's kind of a whole new season, of course, just like in the NBA, just like in the NFL. Once you get to the playoffs, it becomes superstar central, right? So what are your superstars going to do in these one-on-one matchups to create these one-on-one matchups and then exploit those one-on-one matchups? And if your superstars don't show up, then more than likely you're probably going to get exited real early. You feel me? And that's one of the reasons why the Miami Heat, what we did last year, being the 8th seed and making it all the way to the NBA Finals, it was because our All-Stars showed up. Now, we had some really good role players who really showed up for us last year, for sure, but Jimmy Buckets was getting buckets. I actually happened to catch a game. I caught the semifinals when we played the Knicks last year in the Garden, and the atmosphere was litty. It was litty. You feel me? It was a great atmosphere, and Jimmy Butler just was Jimmy Butler. Like, it started out as a regular game. He's like trying to get everybody involved and passing the ball around and stuff like that. And then I think at half, we weren't shooting that well. And I remember telling my wife, I said, we're only down by like 8 points. I was with my wife and I was with my aunt. And I told them, I said, we're only down by, I think it was like 6 to 8 points. And we weren't shooting well at all. I'm like, we're going to win this game. Because even though we weren't shooting that well, we still were in the game. Even though, 8 points in basketball, that can be over in the snap of fingers, for real. And it's a game of runs at the end of the day. But, that's neither here nor there. Getting back to the All-Star Weekend and Damian Lillard winning that, I think that even though, like I said, I pulled from my Miami Heat, I feel as though the Bucks may have that complete team to be able to make it to the finals and potentially compete with whomever comes out of the West. Now, whether that be the Denver Nuggets, being that they are the reigning champions right now, it's a possibility because I think they match up very well. Because they have some ballers themselves, and they also have a big lineup to where the size of the Nuggets won't necessarily hinder them from doing what they need to do, because Jokic is a problem and then you also have Porter Jr. But then on the other side of that with the Bucks, Like, you're going to have to Damian Lillard. You may have to double team him, right? Depending on how hot he gets. Because if he gets hot, boy, you better look out. You also have Giannis, where if he starts getting downhill and starts getting to the basket, he's damn near unstoppable. He's like LeBron without a jumper, honestly. Once he gets that freight train going downhill, it's pretty much lights out from there. So with having him, then you also have Bobby Portis. Bobby Portis is a decent veteran for sure, and he's been in those big situations when they won the championship, so he totally understands what's going on. And then they still have their center, I think it's Lopez. So it would be a very much interesting matchup if they were to meet each other in the finals. Now, once again, you still have Boston coming out of the East. You still have a bunch of teams that are really good as well. And Boston, I believe, is number one right now, if I'm not mistaken. And they're playing really, really good basketball. Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum right now are playing very much complementary basketball together. And they've also been to those big stages as well. So they have the experience to be able to overcome some of the obstacles that they may encounter in the playoffs. So it's going to be a very interesting playoffs this year for sure, especially some of those teams that, like the Miami Heat, who are in 7th, 8th place. Like, yeah, we may not finish out the regular season that great, but we have the experience and we have pretty much the same team minus a couple of players here and there that were on our NBA Finals run team last year. So having that experience, I think, is one of the biggest advantages that any team can have. Not only having your superstars playing at a superstar level, but also having the experience and knowing where you've been and what type of team you are, and also having the coaching to make those adjustments. So the Bucks may have that formula, bringing in Doc Rivers to try to tighten up their defense, because that was one of the aspects that people were saying that was a downfall for them as a team, and that's the reason why they weren't really gelling at the beginning of the season. Getting closer to All-Star Weekend, they began to gel a little bit more, and they started to figure out, how you play, how I play, also how to communicate on defense. I think that was a big thing for them. And like I said, bringing in Doc Rivers to be the head coach now after being in an advisor type role was kind of big for them. He's a big time coach who's used to coaching big time players and creating cohesive groups with different type of personalities. So I think bringing him in was really big. And he's been to the NBA Finals. He's been there, and he knows how and what it takes to get to that level. So it's going to be very interesting to see, and I can't wait. We still got at least 40-something games left to get to the playoffs, but to see how different teams turn it on is going to be an interesting one. So I think with the East winning, it really made it a interesting kind of like storyline to follow, to see whether or not with the East winning the All-Star game, whether or not that was going to carry over, and that will potentially give us a sign as to who will win the NBA Finals. And so I think as the season progresses and we get closer to the playoff time, that's definitely a theory that I can come back to and visit in another future episode. But for right now, I want to switch gears and get into the pay-per-view boxing match that seems like it's going to be a really, really good one. And I kind of have a lot of expectation for this fight. Even though I'm like an Errol Spence fan, I definitely think this is going to be a really, really entertaining fight, and it's going to be a lot closer than a lot of people have been predicting it to be. And that's the Tszyu and Keith Thurman fight. Both guys, let's first start with Tszyu, right? He's the son of Tszyu. Father was a former welterweight champion. Had some big notable fights, of course, against like Zab Judah, also with Ricky Hatton, Julio Cesar Chavez, and his dad was a really good boxer in his own right. Now, Tim is from Australia. His dad is Russian and Australian, and so he has a lot of qualities that his dad has as well, but Tim in his own right is his own man, and I definitely see that this young 29-year-old could potentially be a problem for Keith Thurman, right? He's a light middleweight. So he normally fights at about 154. And the light middleweight is between 147 and 154. But I think he's probably going to come in on fight night a little bit, definitely closer to 154. Tszyu comes into the fight at a record of 24-0, with 17 of those wins coming by the way of knockout. He is a orthodox fighter with a reach of 70.5 inches, which is an 1.5 inch difference when it comes to Keith Thurman's reach at 69. I think that can also play into how the fight plays out, because reach in boxing definitely can be a difference maker for sure. Even though Keith Thurman is the taller fighter at 5'9.5" and Tszyu being at 5'8.5", Keith Thurman, on the other hand, has a record of 30 wins, 1 loss, and that only loss being to Manny Pacquiao, which was a pretty action-packed fight. And Keith Thurman started to turn it on a little bit at the end of that fight, and could have potentially won that fight hadn't been for the knockdown that he sustained in the beginning of the fight because of some of the ring rust, which I'll talk about here shortly, right? So with that being said, Tszyu and Keith Thurman, right? They've had the battle back and forth when it came to whose name should be on the A side, right? Most people have been advertising it as the Keith Thurman Tszyu. So normally whoever's name is first is the bigger name. And in this instance, I think Keith Thurman definitely has the bigger name. Tszyu is an up-and-coming fighter, and to some, this fight is a name grab for Tszyu. But me personally, I think that Keith Thurman has a lot more left in the tank than a lot of people think he has, right? He's 35 years of age, and at that age, normally this is when boxers start to slow down a bit, right? But it's kind of weird in the instance with Keith Thurman because of the fact that he's had so many injuries, right? So even though he's had multiple layoffs, and he fought Manny Pacquiao back in 2019, and then from there, after he fought Manny Pacquiao, he then fought Mario Barrios, which he also won that fight after he lost to Manny Pacquiao in 2019, but that wasn't until 2022 when he fought Mario Barrios, right? So now we're in 2024, another 2 years later, and you're now fighting Tszyu. So the biggest argument that a lot of people have with Keith Thurman in this fight is that he's going to have ring rust, and that's going to be obvious. Like a lot of times when the boxers don't stay active, most boxers nowadays, they probably fight at least maybe 2-3 times a year, right? On average, your big name fighters, they normally fight about like 2 times a year. But you want to stay active. Like you want to have these pay-per-view fights, and you want to have multiple fights, because it is difficult to sometimes transition from, your sparring and in the boxing gym type of fighting to live action. Okay, I'm gonna knock you out and there's no point system, and the breaks are different, right? It's a different type of rhythm that you get into when you are fighting in the gym as opposed to when you're actually performing, right? So that's been the argument. But for me, I think that is also, like I said, his age shouldn't necessarily play that part, because he has had these breaks. So he's been able to keep the tread on his tires per se, right? So normally, like I said, when you're at 35 years of age, you've been at the top of that hill, which he has, right? He has been the unified welterweight champion before at 147. And then the atmosphere and the trajectory of the welterweight division has changed a lot, right? We've had multiple champions, with recently Errol Spence dominating, and then with Errol Spence passing that belt to Terrence Crawford, who had then moved up from 140 to 147 and taken the belt from him. But that itself, like I said, me being an Errol Spence fan, I feel like even that fight wasn't as it should have been, right? Because Errol Spence had been through the car accident. He had multiple surgeries and injuries himself before he was able to get into the ring with Terrence Crawford. So I have my personal opinion about that, and I'll definitely discuss that in another episode, because I can definitely go down that rabbit hole and get into the conspiracy theories around that and why they waited and so forth. But for right now, I'm going to just stick to Keith Thurman, right? I think that him having that time off has allowed his body to recover, number one. It also has allowed him to stay fresh, right? So now that he's back to 100%, because he's had several injuries, right? He's had the neck injury, which was caused by a car accident, and that was back when he was going to fight Sean Porter, and that was back in 2016, right? So starting 6 years ago. He's had a slew of injuries, including he had a neck injury, close to, and one of the reasons why they had to postpone the Sean Porter fight is because of his neck injury due to a car accident that he had. Then he had a couple of hand issues a couple of years later as well. So those hand issues, he also had some back injuries. So he's had a few injuries that definitely held him back. So in that case, a lot of times it doesn't necessarily hurt you, but it also doesn't help you as well, right? So like I said, that inactivity can hurt you, but having these injuries definitely hasn't hindered him. And so his age really shouldn't play a part because now he's 100%, right? But we never know. Like at 35 years old, your fast twitch muscles and stuff like that, it can begin to diminish, right? So that could play a part. He may not be or have the speed that he used to. He may not have the hand speed that he used to before. So that could definitely play a part. And we're going to see in this fight whether or not that's going to make a difference, right? But styles make fights. So with the type of fighting style that Tszyu has, he has this very straightforward, right? He's going to walk you down. He's going to cut off the ring, and he does that at a really good rate. So that in turn has turned into the reason why he has had 17 of his 24 bouts in the knockout, right? Because he can walk people down, cut off the ring, and then he's a really good puncher, right? So he has precision punching and he has good body work. And a lot of times, if the body fails, the head will fall, right? So he wears people down with the body work. And then once that happens in the later rounds, if you don't have your body, it doesn't matter what kind of chin you have, 9 times out of 10, you can definitely be knocked out at that point. And one of Keith Thurman's weaknesses is sometimes being vulnerable to the body, right? His chin is okay, I feel like. But because of the style that he has, he likes to move around and bounce around on his feet. That sometimes can leave openings, which can definitely lead to you getting knocked out. One of the reasons why Manny Pacquiao was able to knock him out, right? So like Manny Pacquiao, he did have heavy hands. He does have heavy hands, but he doesn't have the heaviest of hands, right? So him having decently heavy hands and having that punching power and then having the awkwardness of how he moves about on his feet is the reason why he was able to knock out Keith Thurman. And the openings that I spoke of earlier of how Keith Thurman bounces around, that's how it led to him getting knocked down in that first round. But like I said, he took it like a champ because he does have a decent chin and he hopped up. And I felt like that was kind of the wake up call that he needed in order to get back into that fight. Because after that knockdown, it really became a very interesting fight. And I felt like if Keith Thurman may have had maybe 1 or 2 more rounds, he would have potentially been able to win that fight because he started to get back into the rhythm of things, right? So when you are out of the ring for a while, it just takes you a time or two, or maybe 3 or 4 rounds to just get acclimated back to the speed, right? To get back into the rhythm of how boxing goes and how your opponent at that time is fighting you. So hopefully, with the style that Tszyu has and the walk forward style that he does have, it will allow Keith Thurman to warm up a bit, right? But if Tszyu just comes out hot and he just, jumps on him immediately, that may be a problem for Keith Thurman for sure. Because it's going to just take him a little bit of time to adjust. Now, we also don't know whether or not Keith Thurman has the punching power as the one time Keith Thurman used to have, right? So that's going to be something to definitely watch out for because of the hand injuries that he's had, right? So a lot of times fighters who do have hand injuries, and if they were one of those type of knockout kind of guys, they definitely lose that. They lose some of that pop in the hands. Mayweather is a fine example of that, right? So Mayweather, I think, broke his hand in one of his earlier fights, and he had to adjust his fighting style. In the beginning of his career, he definitely was one of those guys who was knocking out a lot of people. And it wasn't also because he hit the hardest, but it was also because he was very sharp. But then as he got older and after he broke his hand, he had to adjust that and figure out to continue to use that sharpness, but to use more of his speed and that Philly shell in order to win fights and win fights without necessarily having to knock out people. So Keith Thurman, I'm definitely going to be on the lookout for that, and we're going to see if that's going to make a difference in that fight. Now, I think if I had to make a prediction, I think that Tszyu should be able to pull it out, but it's going to be a really, really close one. So that's the reason why I'm going to have to tune in and see. I mean, I pay for it. No, I'm just joking. But I definitely have to tune in to see whether or not who's going to take this fight, because it could go either way. If Keith Thurman of old shows up and he's still got a little bit of pop in his hands, then Tszyu might be in for a long night because of the ring IQ that Keith Thurman and the experience that he has, that ring IQ and experience, or from the experience, I should say, that he has over Tszyu, right? Tszyu has only had 24 professional fights. And even though that's a decent number, I'm not sure if it's enough rounds because you were knocking out people, right? So like you may not have been able or been in the ring with a fighter like Keith Thurman. So with Tszyu's youth, it should pull him through, right? He should be able to take him a little bit deep in the water and continue to use that pressure forward, and probably would go 12 rounds. Or he has the opportunity to be explosive and knock Keith Thurman out. That is the reason why they fight, right? Like, that's the reason why people play football games all the time. People say any given Sunday, and that's because, hey, on paper, they look like the better team, but the better team doesn't always win. And that's because you have to show up and you have to play your game, right? So if Tszyu shows up and he plays his game and Keith Thurman doesn't, then Keith Thurman is going to be in for a long night. But if Keith Thurman one time shows up and he's as explosive as he used to be, Tszyu, you might be in for a show, my friend, and it might be a long night for you. So I'm very interested to see that, and hopefully that turns out to be the interesting fight that I think it's going to turn out to be. And speaking of any given Sunday, let's go ahead and talk about that 2023-2024 LA Rams Boys in Blue season recap, right? So these boys came out sucking ass. Yeah, we started out real bad, man. Well, not real bad. We started out as a 500 team, right? We ended the season at 10-7 with a playoff berth. But it wasn't a lot of expectation for us, right? There wasn't the high expectation after like the season that we won the Super Bowl a couple years ago against the Bengals. It wasn't that expectation. A lot of people were expecting us to end up under 500. The over-under at the beginning of the season from Las Vegas said that we would win over or under 3 games. And when I seen that, I said 3 games. Yeah, let me get $100 on. Let me get $100 on that over right there, my friend. I felt so disrespected as a Rams fan. I'm like, 3 wins, bruh. Y'all gonna give us 3 wins? Like that's highly disrespectful. I'm like, what y'all think we did? What we did? Carolina Panthers, Washington Defend, whatever they want to be called, right? I'm like, yo, that's so disrespectful for 3 wins, yo. But I can totally understand that perspective a little bit. You know what I mean? Maybe a little bit. I mean, I'm a little biased because I am a Rams fan, right? Like, I can understand the perspective because it's like, okay, cool. You win the Super Bowl. You're going to demolish that whole team, right? You brought together a whole bunch of superstars, a few superstars, I should say, with Von Miller, Odell Beckham. Cooper Kupp has the amazing year that he has that year. Matthew Stafford is there. You still got AD, of course. You know what I mean? So you bring together this collective of players. You win the Super Bowl, and then all of those players are going to get the big money. Von went to Buffalo, got his $200 million contract guarantee, which is crazy. Go get the money, my boy. You know, Odell, we got you back up to speed, which I'm still kind of pissed at Odell that he didn't come back to LA after we got your knee right? Like you had a botched surgery. Anyway, that's another story in itself. Odell goes to Baltimore, gets his bread. Great. We got rid of also a couple of other key players like Ashawn Robinson, Greg Gaines. They went and got their checks. I totally understand that. We didn't have the cap space. Unfortunately, we can't keep everybody, right? So in some people's eyes, it seemed like it was a rebuild year for us, right? We're bringing in brand new rookie class, got a bunch of young players, but I had the inside understanding that even though we had a young group, number one, we got really good coaches. Sean McVay is really that dude, and I'm hoping that people are on the Sean McVay train already, right? Like, he is a really good coach, and he has really good assistant coaches, including Raheem Morris, who now got the big check with Atlanta, right? Second point is we did get rid of Jalen Ramsey. He went and got his check, but he was also hurt. You feel me? So it looks from the outside looking in that we're just a really young group and we're not really going to do too much. But like I said, I had the inside track. So my inside track is I was like, hey, even though we're young, a lot of the young guys that we had played significant play time from last year, right? So before we even talk about the draft class that we had previous rookies from the year before that had played a lot of snaps. And the reason why they played a lot of snaps is because we had several injuries. Offensive line was hurt. We couldn't put together a starting lineup to save our lives. Like, we literally had over 10 different combinations that we had at the offensive line. Thus the reason why our quarterback, Matthew Stafford, couldn't get protected. He couldn't stay protected last year, right? He was hurt. He ended up sitting out the rest of the season. Cooper Kupp also goes down into last year. Aaron Donald also, sits out the rest of. He probably could have played, but it's like, hey, what are we playing for? We're not going to risk it. Let's go ahead and bench you for the rest of the season as well. So I think he didn't play like the last 3 games. Cooper Kupp didn't play like the last 3 or 4 games. Matthew Stafford definitely didn't play those games either. So it's like, you could take the good with the bad, right? Even though those 3 who are big didn't necessarily get the playing time or didn't see the playing time at the end of last year and they were hurt. We come back next year, right? That combination of offensive linemen that we didn't have last year, now they had that continuity because of the fact that they had to patch so many different players, right? And another good thing that comes from that is the fact that now if you can plug and play anybody anywhere. Any offensive lineman on an offensive line, other than our tackles, maybe. I think Joe Noteboom is probably one of our only tackles that can actually play inside at the guard position. You can plug them anywhere. So any of our interior linemen, Coleman Shelton, Brian Allen, who we actually just released, Logan Bruss, any of those guys can now be moved along the line, right? So once we had that cohesive group this year, I think that was a start. That was a huge start. A second start was Matthew Stafford being healthy. You know what I'm saying? He had the little elbow issue last year. It was just, inflammatory. And it comes with age. He's a gunslinger, and he slings the rock around. So just like in baseball, you kind of had that Tommy John situation, and they're coming back at full strength. You also now have the emergence of the rookie 2023 class. And we all know who the names are. First one being Puka Nacua. Who would have known? Who would have known a 5th rounder from BYU was going to come and ball out like that? But you can have somebody do that because when you come in the 5th round, it's like we're taking a chance on you, right? So we think you're good enough to be drafted. But at the same time, somebody that's in the 5th round, you're like, he may be a special team guy that could potentially turn into something. So we don't think of you as a 7th rounder where you may not even make the team. Like as a 5th rounder, you're more than likely going to make the team, but as a special teamer, but you have that opportunity with the right coaching. So now we take the really good coaching staff that we have, right? And we plug this player in. And then the opportunity presents itself because your star player, one of your star wide receivers, Cooper Kupp, gets hurt. So now who are those targets going to go to, right? We do have Tutu Atwell, right? We do have Tyler Higbee, but Tyler Higbee has also been hurt as well. So who does those targets go to? You get Puka Nacua, he comes in and he picks the brain of the top receiver, Mr. Cooper Kupp. And when you do that and you're a student of the game and you're willing to take constructive criticism and be able to listen and learn, you have what you have with Puka Nacua. And what that turns into is an AP All-Pro, right? A Pro Bowler, a PFWA rookie team, which is the professional, writers association. They're all rookie team. And then a 4-time Pepsi Rookie of the Week, right? When you have somebody like Matthew Stafford who can sling the ball, man, and if you look into history, you'll see that Matthew Stafford is attached to a lot of wide receiver records. Number one, most yards in a year, right? Both Calvin Johnson, who's number 2 now because of Cooper Kupp's record, right? Both of the quarterbacks that was thrown that to him was Matthew Stafford, right? Now you have a rookie who has now the record for the most receptions for a rookie, Puka Nacua, and the quarterback now associated with that, Matthew Stafford, right? So when you have somebody like him and you have the opportunities that are presented to you with the injuries and so forth, you got to take advantage of it, and that's exactly what he did. He went out there, he worked hard, and he balled out. Now we had some other rookies who also made big impact this year. Second guy that I look at is who we call the conductor, and that's Kobe Turner. Kobe Turner also was named to the all-rookie team. He was the defensive rookie of the month in December. He had 29 solo tackles. He had 9 sacks, which is a rookie record, right? NFL record. And he's tied with who? One of the greats, AD, Aaron Donald, right? So playing next to Aaron Donald, and once again, learning from somebody who has done it at a super high level, you can only get better, right? If you go and you work hard every day, you put your hard hat on, and you are willing to learn, the sky is the limit, man. And that's what Kobe Turner did. He went in and he took advantage of the opportunity that was presented to himself, right? So when you line up next to Aaron Donald, who's going to definitely get doubled and triple teamed almost every play. If you look at film, which I watch a lot of film, especially on the Rams, he's getting doubled and triple teamed every play. There's only 5 offensive linemen every play. You feel me? Like you can add a couple of offensive linemen as tight ends and things of that sort, but offensive lineman wise, there's only 5. So if it's Aaron Donald against 3 people, that leaves 2 people to block at the minimum 3 defensive linemen. So Kobe Turner, you're going to have your one-on-ones, and that's where you should win at. And that's what he did. As the season progressed, he only got better as not only a player, but as a professional. And he's learning continually as he goes, right? So when you're presented with those one-on-ones, you win those, and that's how you end up with 9 sacks. And he stayed healthy. That's another thing, right? As a rookie coming in, especially from college, you're only playing 12, maximum 14 games in college. But to be able to play a 18-game schedule week in, week out, you got to stay healthy. And he was able to do that. So he played in all 18 games this year. Availability is a huge thing when it comes to the NFL. Being available can definitely open a lot of doors and opportunities for you. And I'm happy for Kobe Turner, and I hope for the future that he can continue to grow and just become a better player. Now, even though we lost our defensive line coach this year, he went and he actually went back to college. He went to UCLA. I believe it's either UCLA or USC. He went there to be the defensive coordinator. I could totally understand that you got to go and get that bag, but hopefully it doesn't deter or affect, I should say, the growth of Kobe Turner, because I feel like the sky is the limit for Kobe, and I'm hoping that he continues to grow in the upward manner for sure. Now, another rookie that definitely made a huge impact this year, and especially in an area where I felt like as a team we definitely needed to grow, was Kyren Williams. Now, everybody knows that this man is a beast, right? He came in, and the first couple games that he had 2 touchdowns in each of those games. He, too, was named the AP All-Pro, right? He was named to the PFWA All-NFL and All-NFC team, right? He's also a Pro Bowler, and he was a FedEx Ground Player of the Year finalist, right? I believe he came in like 3rd place. He too would have been considered. It really is considered his rookie year. But he was drafted last year and unfortunately sustained an ankle injury that held him out of last year. So once again, that injury bug from last year not only affected some of our main players, but it also affected some of our draftees like Kyron Williams. And now that you see that he's 100%, you can see what the coaches saw in him when they watched him on tape and when they drafted him last year in the second round, right? Now, this to me also brings about another point about why Cam Akers was acting the way he was acting. We don't see practices every day, and they do have practices every day, and the coaches were making it seem like, or the narrative was swung and given as though, Cam Akers was dispensable. And I'm just like, what is going on here, right? They kept a lot of things where they kept in-house and they kept it under wraps. And I'm just like, why is Cam Akers acting like that? Why is he lashing? It seems like he's just lashing out and he's like, oh, I need the ball and da-da. Like, I just couldn't understand why he was acting the way he was acting. But after seeing Kyron Williams ball out the way he balled out this year, I think that was a piece of it, right? The coaches are looking at it every day in practice. Kyron Williams for a brief minute was playing, right? He was in practice. He was in training camp last year. He also, I think, played in a preseason game or two before he got hurt. So the coaches are seeing this, right? They're seeing his work ethic. They know why they drafted him in the second round. So clearly they felt highly of him in the first place coming out of Notre Dame. And Cam Akers coming off of the Achilles injury, he gave us a boost in the playoffs when we won the Super Bowl. But an Achilles injury can be a very, very tough injury to come from. And a lot of people who have an Achilles injury normally are not the same afterwards, right? They may lose some explosiveness and they're just not the same athlete that they were prior to that injury. There's not a lot of people that you can say is still the same type of guy, right? Maybe you have people like Kobe Bryant, right? He's one of the only athletes that I've ever seen tear their Achilles and still do what they were doing prior. Now, he still didn't have the lift that he had prior to, right? He had to change his game just a little bit, had to be a little more in the post and stuff like that in order to get his points, but he still got buckets. Oh, KD is also another name that, tore his Achilles and came back to be the player that he was prior. But KD never was a high riser in the first place. So it didn't really make a difference on whether or not, he needed to jump out of the gym. So going back to Cam Akers, I think that the injury, number one, was a huge rift between him and the organization. So when he came back, of course, I think he may have rushed back just a little bit to be involved in that playoff run that we had. And like I said, he definitely contributed during that playoff run and making it to the Super Bowl. But once again, he wasn't the same player, right? So you have the injury, number one. Number two, you have Kyron Williams, who's on your heels, my guy, right? You come to practice every day. You see this guy, he's working, you're working, and he's also a second-round draft pick, which you two were also a second-round draft pick. So it's like, clearly they think highly enough, and if they're drafting somebody that high at your position, you got to know that, bro, he's coming for your job, bro. He may potentially be the starting running back if you fuck around and find out. You know what I'm saying? So those two in combination with each other and the fact that it seemed like you, from how they were spinning it, right? I don't know the inside information on this, so I can only look at it from the perspective of being a fan and a spectator, right? So the story that was being pushed is, it seemed like you were being a prima donna-ish, right? You were feeling like you should be given more responsibility, and the coaches you weren't coming to an agreement with. But it looks bad that not only this story is being pushed, even if this is not the truth, right? That story is being pushed, and then you're sitting out games. You have these, I guess, disagreements with the coaches. So when the story is told, you then end up not playing in games. So it just doesn't look good, my guy. It just doesn't look good. So we now ship you off to Minnesota because it's like, we're not going to have this, my guy. Like we really don't need this negativity in our locker room when we have a guy that we drafted in the second round that we feel like can fill your shoes. And we also have other running backs who can at least play the role until Kyron Williams can get back up to speed, because we feel like that's the one who's our guy. So we had, at the time, we still had Sony Michel, right? So Sony Michel is definitely a great running back. Well, I should say a really good running back who can block and can serve the purposes that we need in our offense. We also had Ronnie Rivers, who was also a fellow rookie running back a year or two ago. So like we have guys that can at least stand in that spot until Kyron Williams, the guy that we think is our future, can get up to speed, right? So we're going to ship you off to Minnesota. And now it really looks like I said, I don't have the inside track, but it really does look like you were the problem. Because here we are, you go to Minnesota and then you don't even become that guy at Minnesota. So like, was it the coaches or was it you? And from this perspective, it looks like it was you, my guy. So now we have Kyron Williams, and here he comes, and he's balling out. Like I said, this year he had 228 carries, 1,144 yards, right, with 12 tutties, right? And that's third in rushing in the NFL, only behind Christian McCaffrey and Derrick Henry, which are one of the two, if not three. Well, they're probably the top two running backs in the league right now. It was definitely Derrick Henry has been the rushing leader for like the past 2 to 3 years. And Christian McCaffrey, when he's not healthy, he's definitely one of the top two backs in the league. So for you to be number 3 right behind those guys, and I think Derrick Henry finished with like 1163. So we're 19 yards behind being the second best running back. And I think a little over 50 to 100 yards to be the number 1 running back in his rookie season. He can only get better. And now that Sean McVay has seen that the running game is something that we definitely need to continue to push, and our offensive line has become more of a cohesive group, I think next year the sky is kind of the limit a little bit, right? Like I'm not putting any ceilings on the top of this glass, right? Like I can't do it, because if Sean is able to go back to the drawing board and realize that our running game was so helpful to Matthew Stafford being able to be Matthew Stafford, man, our offense can be crazy good, right? And then we get back a healthy Cooper Kupp. Puka Nacua comes to his second season. Now, hopefully, I'm going to knock on wood, and hopefully like the sophomore slump doesn't come about. But when you have the type of coaching that we have, and you have the veterans that we have in our bunch, I don't think that is necessarily I don't think that's necessarily going to happen, right? So, like I said, number 1, get that running game going. You get a healthy Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua. Tutu Atwell also surprised me this year as well. He came along and had some really big catches. So his growth, I feel like, can also be another thing that can definitely help us. Another key thing that I think that happened this year was the addition of Demarcus Robinson. Now, hopefully, right, he's a free agent. Oh, yes, he may be a free agent after this year. So hopefully we can hold on to him. And with that addition, with those 4 wide receivers and Matthew Stafford throwing it around, and hopefully, I don't know what's going to happen with Tyler Higbee, being that he tore his MCL and his ACL. Like, I think next season can be really, really, really big. We ended out the season on a kind of a sour note, being that we lost to Detroit. But I feel like being such a young team, and I keep putting that label on us, but we technically were a young team, right? Being such a young team, that taste of the playoffs, it just is going to leave salt in the mouth, right? It's just going to have them salivating to work even harder to get back to where we were. Because honestly, in that game against Detroit, we were 1 or 2 plays away from winning. And those 1 or 2 plays came because we couldn't put the ball in the box in the red zone, right? And if we were able to put the ball in the box in the red zone opportunities that we had, yeah, we're talking a different game. We're talking a totally different game. We're going to win that game in Detroit, mind you, right? And that would have been a Cinderella story for us to take Matthew Stafford back to Detroit, where he wasted. He wasted 12 years of his career, right? And thankfully, he was able to get out of there because there's been several NFL greats, including Barry Sanders and Megatron, that have wasted their time in Detroit and got to a point where they didn't even have any more in the tank or exhausted themselves to wanted to go somewhere else or couldn't even go anywhere else because so much time was wasted there and their bodies just couldn't take it anymore. So that storyline would have been amazing to have Matthew Stafford go back after winning the Super Bowl, right? Leaving their team after 12 years in Detroit, win the Super Bowl in his first year with the Rams, come back and beat the team that he left to win the Super Bowl for, right? That would have been an amazing storyline, especially Detroit has such a good year. And I'm proud of Jared Goff, right? I'm happy that he was thrusted to Detroit, right? He was traded to Detroit and he was put into a really good situation. Like he could have been traded away to any other team and it may not have worked out as well as it has for him. And like I said, I'm happy for him. I clap it up for him for sure. But I think us winning in Detroit would have been an amazing storyline. But it's neither here nor there, right? Those couple plays did not happen for us. And unfortunately, we ended our season in Detroit with a tightly contested game. So our season, like I said, ended way better than anybody ever expected. 10-7. Like I said, most people were expecting us to be no more than 3 games, which I think is just so far-fetched, which is crazy. Because like I said, the teams that finished with 3 wins this year and 4 wins this year was Carolina Panthers, Washington Commanders. And you can't tell me that we're not better than both of those teams. So even as a young team that we are. And we were still able to finish the season at 10-7 and second place in the NFC West, right behind San Francisco, who ended up going to the Super Bowl and losing to the Kansas City Chiefs. So the ceiling is exceptionally high for us. I think that with this next draft coming up for 2024 and us having a first round draft pick for the first time since 2016, we have a chance to establish something really great. It's going to be a tough battle, especially in the NFC West, but there's a lot of change going on in the NFC West, right? You have Arizona, who I don't think they're going to be irrelevancy for a little while. They have some quarterback issues. They got rid of their head coach. I also see Seattle, they had to change that coach. They got rid of Pete Carroll. And then San Francisco, coming off of the Super Bowl loss to Kansas City, will they be the same? Are they going to be able to keep that team together? Because they had a bunch of free agents that they brought over to make that Super Bowl run as well. So we'll see if they'll be able to keep that together. And if they are, offensively, they may be okay. But what about the defense? Because a lot of their free agent pickups were on the defensive side of the ball. It's going to be definitely a journey, and I can't wait to take that journey with my team. And I believe we're going to be number 1 in the NFC West. I'm going to make a bold prediction right now and say this on the podcast that I think that the Rams are going to win the NFC West next year. Take my words and we'll see. And so that's all I have for this week's episode of Taking These Sports Podcast. As I stated in the beginning of the podcast, I want to hear from the fans. I want to hear your feedback so I can get better. This is my first time ever recording a podcast, and I'm trying to get back into the groove, and I want to be the best podcast there is for my listeners. So all I want to do is hear that feedback. So what you can do for me is write in the comments. You can also find me on Instagram, Twitter. My email address is takeakneespodcast@gmail.com. Also, you can find me on Instagram at Takeakneesportspodcast, as well as the same name on Twitter. I want to hear from you guys. I want to get better so I can improve and give you the best content. And I'll be posting content on a weekly basis every Thursday. So until next time, stay locked in.